Good evening, and welcome to a community conversation of the Lorentzsen Center for Faith and Work, a program of the Offutt School of Business at Concordia College. My name is Per Anderson, Interim Director of the Center. Established 8 years ago, the Center honors the life of Norman Lorentzsen, Concordia graduate, CEO of Burlington Northern Railway, Regent of the College, and generous philanthropist. The Center seeks to integrate faith and work in support of the vision of the Offutt School to serve society through ethical leaders who are confident, curious, and globally competent. We gather this evening for a fourth conversation in our series on good work and its future toward respect, engagement, and meaning. Guided by the social teaching of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, we seek through this series to better understand work and its future for all, including future generations. From the beginning, we have noted that good work eludes many people today. Only a third of workers report being engaged with their work. 1/3 report active disengagement. How can people of goodwill, citizens, come together to improve work for all? What imperatives should we address? In conversations to date, we have examined workplace conditions that rightly cause many Americans to withhold vigorous investment in their work. These conditions have raised questions whether our society observes sufficient respect for large portions of the American workforce. For our first conversation, we looked at workforce safety for essential workers in the pandemic and saw how the absence of a public safety net and resistance to public health measures have resulted in the overrepresentation of Black, Indigenous, and people of color in rates of infection. These Americans are generally overrepresented in frontline work as well. This disparity correlates with another, that BIPOC Americans make 75 cents for every dollar that white Americans make. To account for these disparities, we considered in our second conversation the persisting reality of racism in the USA and across the world. We examined racism as a cultural system of power, privilege, and bias that denies or diminishes the dignity, the moral standing of some members of society, and that leads to unjust distributions of goods and to social exclusion. Here we asked what people of goodwill should expect of the business community to achieve social justice for BIPOC employees. We considered whether the commitments of American business to dismantling racism are real and effective. For ELCA teaching, treating employees with respect means many things: fair remuneration, benefits and protections, safe conditions, job security, training, participatory decision-making, and the right to organize and bargain collectively. These goods should also be supported by the state and include protections against low wages, hiring discrimination, and unemployment. In these ways, ELCA thought supports important social gains of the 20th century for full-time and enduring employment. Of the American workforce, about 25%, with 10% relying exclusively on gig work. It comes with a major shift of responsibility and risk from employers unto individual workers, resulting in a greater precarity in the quest for livelihood and personal fulfillment at work. For many Americans, work is becoming less secure and more burdensome to the point of injustice. Fortunately, public debate and decision-making to address this shift are beginning. Aggrieved workers are advocating for justice. Tonight, we turn to another dimension of work that calls for public accountability and response: automation. We humans are inventive beings. Throughout history, we have used technology continuously to automate work, to augment or replace existing forms of labor, to be more productive, and to improve the human condition. Over the course of centuries, humans have used technology to generate astounding power to enhance and extend our natural abilities. By 2025, the World Economic Forum estimates that the time spent on current tasks by humans and machines will be equal. Humans created these machines, and now we depend upon them for our basic needs of life. With power comes responsibility, and here humans have often lacked strong foresight and concern about the negative consequences that automation can have for individuals and communities. Progress for some can be disruption and even destruction for others. While the ELCA has no specific social teaching on workplace automation, it has a carefully developed position on the role technology plays in human affairs. And it calls its members to be what it calls innovative stewards of the world and to use technology for the flourishing of life. This church values the immense power that humans now wield and therefore calls upon its members to assume a level of accountability commensurate with this power. It has developed an elaborate ethics of responsibility to guide the just and wise use of technology for the good of the community of life, now and in the future. The social vision of the ELCA suggests both a positive and a conditional and cautious view of workplace automation. Tonight, we will engage both the beneficial and potentially harmful dimensions of automation. Our subject is complex and dynamic. The experts disagree on important points, like just how many jobs will be lost in the next 10 years and how many will be gained. But the analysts agree that we are entering into a new era of automation, artificial intelligence, advanced robotics, machine learning, big data analysis, that will bring new challenges with outcomes that will depend on what we, employees, employers, American society, and even the world community do in coming years. So the future is not predetermined and depends upon the choices we all make as workers and citizens. What we know today is that we face significant social challenges such as an aging workforce, growing populations who need food in a changing climate, and governmental systems struggling today to respond. How might workplace automation address these and other challenges? What do we know? What do we need to figure out? What strategies have worked in the past to mitigate bad outcomes? In short, are we ready for the new automation? We are fortunate to have three distinguished panelists to help us with these questions. Ahmed Kamel is a professor of computer science and management information systems at the Offutt School of Business. He earned a doctorate in computer science from Michigan State University in 1994, specializing in artificial intelligence, and completed an MBA at North Dakota State University in 2013. Professor Kamel's research interests in applied AI and knowledge-based systems are broad and diverse, including representation of and reasoning about physical devices, software support for engineering design, agricultural planning support, integration of linked problem-solving agents, and office automation. He thinks as well about the social impact of computers and their applications. Professor Kamel has contributed extensively to refereed journals and conference proceedings and is a sought-after speaker for national and international events. As a teacher, Professor Kamel enjoys constant learning with students to motivate them to be lifelong learners as well. Dana Peterson is Chief Strategic Officer at Emerging Prairie in Fargo, North Dakota, where she has just yesterday assumed responsibilities for strategic vision, planning, and implementation that focuses on organizational growth, collaboration with existing and new partners, special projects, network development, and public affairs. Prior to joining Emerging Prairie, Ms. Peterson served in executive positions at the U.S. Department of Agriculture in rural development and the Farm Service Agency, including coordinating department-wide initiatives. One initiative investigated how USDA could encourage and support adoption of precision agricultural technologies in rural America. Ms. Peterson grew up in Kansas on a diversified crop and livestock farm and studied agricultural economics at Kansas State University. She started her career advocating for wheat farmers and moved to Washington, D.C. to lead the National Association in 2010. Tonight, Ms. Peterson will talk to us about the Grand Farm project of Emerging Prairie. According to the Emerging Prairie website, the Grand Farm is described as this, that this site will create the farm of the future by 2025 as the global example in solving challenges to farming worldwide while unleashing vast new potential for technology for the greater good. It will do so by growing and inspiring regional businesses, organizations, and entrepreneurs to collaborate globally in developing technological and human solutions for farming in a new era. Darrell M. West is Vice President and Senior Fellow of Governance Studies at the Brookings Institution in Washington, D.C., where he holds the Douglas Dillon Chair in Governance Studies. Previously, he was John Hazen White Professor of Political Science and Public Policy and directed the Taubman Center for Public Policy at Brown University. His current research focuses on American politics, technology policy, and artificial intelligence. Dr. West is the author of 25 books, including most recently Turning Point, Policymaking in the Era of Artificial Intelligence in 2020 with General John Allen, Divided Politics, Divided Nation, Hyper-Conflict in the Trump Era in 2019, and The Future of Work, Robots, AI, and Automation in 2018. Dr. West is the winner of the American Political Science Association's Don K. Rice Award for Best Book on Technology and the American Political Science Association's Doris Garber Award for Best Book on Political Communications. His books have been translated into Chinese, Japanese, and Korean, and he has delivered lectures in countries around the world. Welcome to our guests this evening. We will begin with remarks from our panelists, and then we will follow up with conversation among them, and I will open the floor for questions from our audience. Darrell, welcome. Please start our conversation.
Thank you, Per. It's a pleasure to be with you at Concordia, and I'm happy to talk about the subjects of AI, automation, and the future of work. There are lots of exciting changes taking place in each of those areas, and I think it's important for people to prepare themselves for the new economy that really is starting to emerge right now. So you mentioned my new book, Turning Point. In that book, I argue that the technology revolution is accelerating. I think people are going to be really shocked how quickly some of the changes take place. So for example, we're already seeing fully automated retail stores. Amazon has opened several stores without any cashiers. You basically walk in, use the app, you go shopping, you walk out through a turnstile, and it automatically sees what you have picked up and will automatically charge your credit card or your mobile payment system. So no sales clerks, no cash register. Basically, you walk in and you walk out. In the finance area, we're seeing AI being deployed for fraud detection and also for wealth management. It turns out that computers are more rational and less emotional than humans, and those turns out to be really good qualities in terms of managing your finances. In the healthcare area, we're seeing a growing use of technology. There are remote monitoring devices that can check your vital signs, your glucose levels, your blood pressure, your heart rhythms, and other things, and then electronically transmit that to your doctor. And that allows healthcare then to become more proactive as opposed to reactive. Instead of waiting for people to get sick, we can spot some of the early warning signs that might indicate some more serious malady taking place. And higher education itself is being transformed by AI and predictive analytics. There are models that can look at student behavior. Are they coming to class? How engaged are they with material? Are they starting to fall behind? And basically use these data analytics to predict who is at risk of dropping out of school. And then that allows colleges and universities to reach out to the particular students, offer counseling, offer help, and try and keep them from becoming a dropout. So we're going to see technology really unfold in many different sectors in a lot of different ways. And I know one of the particular aspects that you're interested in this series is what is going to be the impact on the workforce? How's it going to affect young people who are getting their education right now? And one of the crucial things I think that all of us need to be thinking about is how we're going to train people for the 21st century economy. Young people are going to need different skills than what my generation needed. It'll be a combination of both soft skills and hard skills. One of my favorite insights comes from Charles Darwin, the famous student of evolution, who commented that survival is going to go not to the strongest or the most intelligent, but the most adaptable. And I've always thought that now that we're making this transition from an industrial to a digital economy, that particular observation is very relevant because young people are going to need skills of adaptability, persistence, resilience, flexibility, because there's going to be a lot of changes that come out of them. Some of them are based on technology. Some of them are just changes in business models. Per mentioned climate change. We're gone through the last year of a major pandemic. There's just a lot going on that's going to affect young people, going to affect the workforce. And so we need to be training them for these soft skills of how to adapt to a rapidly changing environment. We're going to probably see an increase in what we call job churn, meaning people moving from position to position, job to job, and company to company. Businesses are relying more on temporary workers and independent contractors. And so it changes the nature of the relationship between the employer and the employee. There certainly are going to be many jobs that are threatened. Entry-level jobs are going to be particularly at risk. Retail clerks, there are 8 million of them in the United States. They're going to be at risk as retail stores start to deploy automation. Truck driving and taxi driving is going to be at risk when autonomous vehicles get perfected and start taking on some of those responsibilities. There's something like 12 million gateway jobs, entry-level jobs, and those are very valuable positions for people who are joining the workforce, because oftentimes they get that first job and then if they do well, then they're able to advance to higher level positions. If those entry level jobs go away, it's a question of how are we going to get people into the workforce and what kind of skills are going to be needed in order to do that. But it's not just entry level jobs that people should be worried about. So for example, in the healthcare area, there now are AI models that can read CAT scans and X-rays with a very high degree of accuracy. There have been studies published in peer-reviewed journals that show that these AI models are almost as accurate as the readings of radiologists. And so higher level jobs such as radiology, reading X-rays, we actually can automate those types of jobs. The same thing is true in terms of accounting as a profession. It's a very important job, but machines and AI are actually very good at numbers. So one of the things that people should be thinking about is there are going to be jobs lost. There also are going to be jobs created, but the risk is that there could be a mismatch, meaning people will not necessarily have the skills needed for the new jobs that are going to be created. And so we're going to need to think about that. The last couple of points that I'd like to make, and then I'm looking forward to hearing the comments of the other panelists, is the good news is we actually can control our future. You know, sometimes when I give talks about AI and robots, people worry that there's a loss of human agency, that humans are no longer in control, that the technology is accelerating at such a rapid pace that we don't have any choice and that there could be bad consequences. What we suggest in our book is one, we need to start thinking about what we call lifetime learning, meaning that the old model where we invested in education up through about age 25 and then people were on their own after that is going to become obsolete. People are going to have to reskill, upskill, learn new skills at various points in their lives at age 30, 40, 50, and even 60. People are basically going to have to learn different skills at various points in their lifetime, because people are likely to have multiple jobs, to be moving around more, to move from company to company and even sector to sector. And so they may need to advance their job skills at various points in their life. The other thing that we should be thinking about as a country is just the nature of our public policy. So if people are going to be switching from job to job, we need to start to emphasize portable benefits, meaning healthcare benefits, retirement benefits that move with you as you're moving from job to job and company to company. Some companies have a vesting period where you have to work for that company for 2 years before you qualify for retirement benefits. If people are moving around a lot more from job to job, that one particular provision starts to become more of a problem. And so as we're thinking about public policy, we need to start to imagine policies that can help people learn new skills at various points in their life, and that also the healthcare benefits and the retirement benefits can be easily transferred from company to company and job to job. So why don't I stop at that part and turn it back to the other panelists.
Thank you, Daryl, for that excellent account of the landscape of work, the technology itself. We look forward to coming back to some of the things you're reflecting on, and then the policy. We want to give that due attention. I'm struck that we may have a lot of insight into the future. Getting there is another matter. Ahmed, you bring to us the vision from primary research and teaching about artificial intelligence. Please tell us about your work and what you're thinking about these things these days.
Well, my area of my primary area of research, that's where I got my PhD in, is actually artificial intelligence. Well before it became in vogue. So I think I would like to start by introducing what is AI. People really have very mixed views of what is AI. The popular media tends to put ideas there that some of it is realistic, some of it is not at all. Among people, the professional community of AI researchers and educators and so on, one of the issues that troubles everybody, almost everybody agrees, that one of the biggest disservices that ever happened to that field of study is naming it AI, because it gives an expectation that there is an actual intelligence at play, which of course there isn't. This is, at the end of the day, it's a computer, it's programmed by a human being. So there is, it's ultimately algorithmic. Interestingly enough, almost all AI researchers will agree that even though AI started bearing fruit and we started seeing systems and applications in the real world now, there is actually no new developments that happened within the last 10 or 15 years. Most of the techniques that are being used now have been developed in the really in the 1990s and the early 2000s. What happened now is we finally have the hardware technology caught up with the ideas, and we have machines that are fast enough to implement those ideas, and that's why we're starting to see them bear fruit. But the concept itself, I mean, people started talking about intelligent machines. I mean, you can go look back at Greek philosophy. They were talking about intelligent machines, of course, that didn't materialize. But when computers first appeared in the middle of the previous century, they were nicknamed the artificial brain, which of course implies intelligence and so forth, but that's not, that also was that name fortunately disappeared very quickly. So lately, what's happening lately is we're starting to see the ideas that were developed finally bearing fruit and moving to the application arena. So we're seeing, like Daryl mentioned, we're seeing applications, really massive, interesting applications of AI in a variety of different disciplines. For example, they're mentioned in the financial domain and fraud detection and so forth. In the medical domain, they're mentioned saying that there are medical systems that are almost as good as radiologists in reading X-rays and so forth. In fact, there are some systems that are actually significantly better than human practitioners. There is a particular AI system that's currently in use in over half of rural hospitals in the United States, in emergency rooms, whose job is to essentially when patients show up with symptoms that can be confused, is it a heart attack or a simple heartburn, they had a big meal, the system distinguishes between the two. And studies say that this system has an average accuracy rating of 96%, whereas the average physician that does this exact same job has an average rating of accuracy rating of 92%. So where is this 4% coming from? Notice that I use the term average. So we're talking about the average physician. A researcher who's going to build a system like this is not going to interview an average physician for the knowledge to incorporate into the system, but the best physicians and multiple physicians, so you get reinforcement and things of this nature. But then this points to another really interesting problem. If we're talking about systems at this levels, at this point in time, these systems are extremely expensive to build. We do not have any mechanisms other than one area, robotics. AI is actually at this point in time is expensive. Of course, it will continue, the cost will continue going time over, but it's not like some of a common misperception these days that, oops, all of a sudden we will wake up tomorrow and the world is taken over by AI. It's going to be way more gradual than that. Because to start with, we're labeling multiple things, we're calling them AI. Most of the current AI falls into a variety of different sub-disciplines that are not the same. Many of these systems fall into a category called expert systems, where it's really not truly an intelligent system at all. It's simply we extract rules from human practitioners, program them, and have a program follow these exact same rules to make its own conclusions, like the fraud detection and things like that. There is a newer area called deep learning, which is a sub-branch of an older area called machine learning, where we have systems that can essentially teach themselves, draw conclusions. But how are they going to draw conclusions? We're not in a situation where we have an intelligent computer that's going to make conclusions based on logic or anything of this nature. It's simply they're modeled after, we're creating artificial constructs similar to neurons and synapses in the human brain, where we have algorithms to strengthen them and strengthen connections and weaken them and so forth. Based on what? Based on feedback from a human operator that constantly is feeding back, yes, you got this right, no, you got this wrong, and so on. So this is, and this area, it's starting to show significant results. Some of the newer fraud detection systems in particular have been relying on this technology to draw more robust rules. But at the same time, many researchers are pointing to a real danger that's happening, that these systems are learning bad habits from people. So I don't know, some people from the audience may have read a case that happened 3 months ago, where there's a huge controversy in the AI research department at Google about AI systems that they're building that are essentially inheriting biased reasoning rules from human beings, being anti-feminist, anti-racist, being racist, and so on. So, and it unfortunately, it is happening. So we have to be very careful with these things. You know, it's if we're going to have programs that learn, we have to institute systems in place for us to make sure that they are learning what we want them to learn, as opposed to learning our bad habits and inheriting them. So these are issues there, but we're seeing AI also. The AI is taking place in lots of other areas. Robotics is often classified as a sub area of AI, and we're seeing robots taking over lots of applications that jobs that many times jobs that are dangerous for human beings. We no longer have any human being in any factory painting cars. Cars are entirely being painted by robots because the exposure to this paint is extremely dangerous for human beings, and we don't want that. But also, it exposes a risk. What's going to happen? You know, they're talked about certain AI systems taking over certain jobs. We already have. There are restaurants in New York City and in LA where the servers are robots. There are no human servers in the restaurant. You get a robot, you order through a screen on your table, and you get a robot coming carrying a plate and puts the food in front of you. And so certainly there are certain jobs of this way. There are mentioned the Amazon stores. I've actually been in one of these stores and I experienced it. It's quite a phenomenon. You really, yes, you go grab groceries. It's not blind. It's fully transparent. You have a monitor in front of you, and it shows you a running tally of a shopping cart and so on. But then, as soon as you leave from a particular gated area, and your credit card is charged, and you leave. So, how many cashiers will be replaced? Also, you know, cars, autonomous vehicles that are mentioned is okay. So it's replacing. We have a massive number of truck and taxi drivers in this country. If these jobs get lost, that's going to be a major social problem that we have to solve, because certainly the average consumer would love to see an autonomous vehicle. I mean, I would love to be able to sit in the back seat and read while I'm going to work in the morning, sure. But at what cost to society? So there are issues like this. There are other areas are not as invasive. Over the years, I'll tell you, I'll give you a few examples of things I've personally worked on. Starting in the 90s, I've worked on systems that design composite materials. You know, in fact, this was work done for Chrysler, and they were using my systems for years to design bumpers. I worked in agriculture, where we, under USAID guidance, we were building systems to manage wheat farms, both in Michigan and in Egypt, to you know, design irrigation schedules and fertilization schedules and amounts and so forth. The system that if you ever go to the events at the Fargo Dome here in town, the traffic signals around the area there, they actually talk to each other with an AI system that actually decides after an event which traffic signal gets a bigger red and a bigger green and so forth, a longer red and a longer green, to make sure the traffic flows successfully. I was also part of that. And so these are systems, they're not really replacing a human job. If you decide the traffic signal, who is this replacing? But it's doing significant service. So the effect really varies by which area of AI, what sub area, what is it actually doing, and so on. So and then so the end result, what's the effect of this? What should the educational system be doing to prepare society for this? We certainly, like I mentioned, we need lifelong learning by everybody. I mean, the idea of generations past where you learn your knowledge and you continue to apply it for the rest of your life is not going to cut it anymore. We will always have to keep changing and changing again and again and again. And we have to constantly, so this is for the consumer of education, but for the provider of education, we also have to be consistently updating what is it that we're teaching. The skills that we teach have to always evolve because these areas are evolving. They will continue to evolve. Anybody that tells you now, here is what AI will be doing 5 years from now, I'll be extremely suspicious of that. So we have to keep up with the technology. The educational systems have to keep up with the technology. Not to mention that the education system itself being affected by technology. Technology is playing roles. There are in developing educational systems and so on. So I think that's my spiel, and I will return it back to you.
Thank you so much for that insider look, Ahmed. We're going to again have to come back and ask how do we get a handle on this in terms of public oversight? Who's making the decisions? What are the drivers? I'm just so curious to your thoughts on how does this technology come to be? What are the forces behind it? We turn now to Dana. We're so pleased to have you with us. This is your second day of work at Emerging Prairie. We're very aware that you're just joined the Fargo-Moorhead community, and we had a little brief opportunity to talk about, your opportunity here. I'm very mindful that we're talking about a sector of the American economy that's dramatically been informed by technology. Most Americans come from an agrarian background 100 years or so ago, and that ended with mechanization. I can tell you the story of in 1965 visiting my relatives on the east side of the Missouri River, who were farmers, and they had draft horses. I was 10 years old, so I don't know anything really about how the farm worked, but there were hired hand, there was a couple, and there were draft horses. I can't imagine that they were farming that much land, but that was in 1965. So we look forward to hearing about the vision that Grand Farm has and hearing the inside story on what farmers need for automation. So thank you.
Thank you, Per. And just wanted to express my thanks to everyone. Such a distinguished panel to come together tonight to talk about an important subject. So thank you very much for the opportunity. I did get an insight into the technologies that are being adopted in agriculture with that kind of collaborative project in the Department of Agriculture, but I stay pretty closely connected to my family's farm in Kansas. Two of my four brothers are operating that farm, and they give me an opportunity to get into the equipment and see it on the ground and see what the technology's doing for them personally. And so I'm going to share a little bit with you about that tonight. So precision agriculture technologies have been around for a few years now, 20, 25 years. There's been technologies that are being added to the traditional tractor, combine, those sorts of technologies that many Americans are familiar with. These technologies allow precision in planting seeds, in placing pesticides and tools to help the crop survive and to thrive, including water, as Ahmed really mentioned, with the irrigation tools that are helping farmers be more precise with limited resources. And generally, it is that economy that is driving the adoption of these technologies on America's farms and ranches. And so kind of the vision that Emerging Prairie and the very innovative and creative folks here in the Red River Valley and Fargo-Moorhead areas is really to create a farm that allows some creative collaborative space for demonstrating technologies. And hopefully, by 2025, there will be this goal met of a farm that is the farm of the future. My own personal experience with adoption of technologies in agriculture is it takes time. My brothers are a younger generation than most farmers in America, and the adoption of technology, takes a few years for farmers to learn from one another what is a benefit and what is actually, helping them in their operation, making their job safer, making the environment safer, allowing them to be better stewards of what they've been given to care for. And so having this opportunity with Grand Farm to really put together partners and companies and farmers to demonstrate what the technologies are today, and also think about what do we want to do in the future, and what are those future challenges that can be overcome through these technologies. Some of the challenges that we're seeing in the adoption of precision ag technologies is really, there are some policy challenges, particularly with autonomous vehicles. And so we're working very closely with the Department of Defense and Department of Transportation on, the policies that are set with those vehicles, and how do autonomous vehicles interact in the same spaces with human-run vehicles. And so want to make sure and have those things clarified. We have a huge gap within connectivity. So broadband capabilities, mobile capabilities for data transfer, satellite information and guidance of vehicles and machinery. So that's a challenge that we have. And then, just the adoption of these technologies, the financial requirements it has to buy on a farm, but also to look at kind of where are the opportunities for rural businesses to support farming of the future. A lot of the technologies that my brothers have on the farm for weed control come from a consultant that then helps them not only with the machinery that consultant can use on a greater number of acres by contracting with a number of farmers, but also the knowledge on how to maximize that type of technology, the data that's then generated by that technology. And so kind of thinking through what are the opportunities for business opportunities and workforce development for rural communities and kind of regional hubs. I think these are all important questions that we need to consider as we look at the adoption of technology, as we think about what farming is today and where it will be maybe 20, 30, 40 years down the future. How do we build all of the systems that are needed for that whole industry to thrive in this realm of technology, automation, and utilizing data and maximizing our resources and being good stewards. So thank you for the opportunity, Per.
All right, thank you. So before we turn to some audience questions, I want to try to pose a question along the lines of how we as citizens can take responsibility to assist researchers, technologists, the business community, some of the drivers that are putting risk out there and putting capital into this, how we as a society oversee this. Ahmed gave the pretty good example of, say, the questions that are being raised about the YouTube technology and how it's perhaps the algorithms are set up so as to encourage certain kinds of extremist thinking. And there's some people investigating, again, where did those algorithms come from? Can they be address those kind of things. So I'm really curious about sort of at least two things to begin with. I'm really struck, Dana, that you're now investing in this Grand Farm, which we would call, you know, a kind of a voluntary association of people that want to better their lives. They want a better society by using science, technology, and applied learning, those kind of things. But it's a public, it's largely public. You know, there will be an opportunity for people to look at it and to debate it. And it's out into the open. These are people seeking a livelihood. A lot of technology is proprietary, right? So I don't want to talk about what I'm working on that's going to be the next big thing that's going to make significant resources for my shareholders. And so my ability, I think, to be forthcoming about what the future is or how the future will be shaped by that technology might be limited by that reality, right? So how do we, as citizens, begin to understand this? So my first question really is, do we feel like the American public has a good handle on really what's happening? Because if you start reading the books, you start, you know, moving around with different perspectives on what this future is going to be. I'm noticing that the Aspen Institute has a set of challenges for decision makers and so on. And challenge number 4 is this: policymakers, communities, workers, businesses, educators, and other stakeholders struggle to understand how automation is changing the economy because federal, state, and local data on the impact of technology on work is inadequate. So our information systems, are they adequate? Daryl, in your policy work, do you feel like you have the data on which to operate? How do we get at that? And then what are the mechanisms in place for citizens to really participate? We're very dependent on institutions like the Brookings Institution to create public policy, nonpartisan, make proposals. But what's happening around the country for people to begin to tune into this? I asked one of my colleagues today, Bree Langemo, about, are we just starting to see more news stories about automation, or are we just looking for them now? Is something starting to happen in the public sector for conversation? So my question is, what's the state of our knowledge on which we're going to make decisions? And then where are we in our systems of decision-making as a public?
So I can jump in on that. On the last part of that question, where are we in terms of the state of knowledge? I would say experts are pretty sharply divided in terms of the workforce implications and the possible number of jobs that could be lost through AI, robotics, and automation. I've seen everything from no impact to half of the jobs being lost, which of course would be completely catastrophic if we were at the high end of that range. But even if we're at the low end, let's say hypothetically only 5 to 10% of the jobs are going to be affected. You know, during the Great Recession of 2008 and 2009, you know, we had a national unemployment rate a little higher than 10%, and it was terrible. You know, it was devastating for people. So even if the job impact is relatively small in the 5 to 10% range, that's still millions of people who are affected. So we do have to worry about that. In terms of what the public knows and how they are viewing technology, I think the public is quite attuned to some of the risks of technology. Certainly when you look at public opinion surveys, and you know, we pay a lot of attention to how the public is reacting to different things. We see lots of concerns being expressed about the negative impact on privacy, problems in terms of human safety. Are there biases coming out of these AI algorithms? You know, financial institutions are now making loan and mortgage decisions based on algorithms as opposed to human lending officers. Are those algorithms operating fairly and equitably? So the public does, I think, have a sense of the possible problems that are out there. What we try and do at Brookings is come up with public policy recommendations that preserve innovation, because we want innovation that makes people's lives easier and safer. And Ahmed pointed out technology can do the dirty and dangerous jobs and therefore make it safer for humans. But at the same time, we do have to address these issues of the loss of privacy, the impact on human safety, the bias questions. And so we need public policies that can balance, like maintaining innovation on the one hand, but protecting us against some of the risks that we can already see.
Is it fair to say, though, that we're in a difficult historical moment because of this talk about the speed of these changes? Ahmed said, I wouldn't listen to, I wouldn't take predictions that go very far out into the future. This is the thing that concerns me, is our capacity in public policy to keep up with the rate, the scale of this change and have some kind of democratic deliberation about it. Is that a fair concern?
That is definitely a fair concern, because we believe the next 5 to 10 years is going to see rapid advances in technology innovation in a number of different sectors. I mean, if you just look at the COVID impact over the past year, like COVID basically forced what otherwise might have been 5 years of digital change into 5 months, because we all had to adjust to online learning, and K to 12 students, as well as students in colleges and universities, had to shift to online learning. In healthcare, we shifted to telemedicine. I know when I meet with my doctor now, I'm generally not meeting in person. It's a video conference call. People have shifted to remote work as opposed to physically going into the buildings. People are relying a lot more on e-commerce as opposed to shopping in person. So the pandemic has had an effect of accelerating the technology changes. And a lot of these changes are going to be permanent. Like even after COVID dissipates, a lot of these changes are still going to be here. So we are going to have to adapt to that. At the same time that AI is advancing, there also are going to be advances in supercomputing, in quantum computing, in 5G networks that are going to be much faster, and therefore there are going to be new types of platforms that speed up the process of innovation. So there's no question that the next 5 to 10 years, the pace of technology acceleration is going to get a lot faster. And that worries people. People worry that things are just out of control, that humans are no longer in control of the technology. And what we like to remind people is public policy is a vehicle to deal with these side effects, to address workforce training, to improve people's job skills. So I try and deliver an optimistic message that even though the technology is advancing, like we're still in control, and through our policy choices, we can ease the transition to the digital economy so that people are not left behind.
Right. Okay. Before we turn to our first question, I want to go back to Dana and ask you, here you have this this community of discourse about the future of farming that's developing. Is that giving voice to what farmers are looking for? Do farmers know what they are looking for from technology? And is this an opportunity to get the technology they really need to be more productive, to solve the problems that they face? Because market forces, seem to be driving a lot of this and create products that then we're persuaded to use that may not be exactly what we need or want.
Right. So I think some of the things that are driving the technologies in agriculture are, the fact that the average age of the American farmer is in its late 50s. And there's not a lot of new entrants into that market, into that job force, that workforce. There's difficulties with migrant workers and in getting folks into the country who want to work on America's farms. And so those challenges are leading to the adoption of technologies and even really the creation of new technologies to overcome those challenges. For example, when I was growing up, we would regularly walk fields to remove weeds in milo and soybeans and corn fields. Those things are done with autonomous drones and in some cases robots now, because we don't have the workforce. That has been an opportunity for the technology to develop. So I do believe that most of the technologies are engaging farmers in development, whether that is public research dollars through USDA funded research programs across the country at our land grant institutions, or whether that's a private company who they bring in regularly teams of farmers that help consult on their problems and how that company can help fill the gaps.
Great, thank you. We do have a question coming up from a farmer in a minute, but we have another person who has a question really about this big challenge that you've all talked about really, and it goes like this. To what extent is the vision of profound forms of lifelong learning consistent with what developmental psychology understands about learning capacities over an entire human lifespan? Anyone want to think about that? I mean, it sounds like a question that's expressing some concern about maybe human capacity for this kind of consistent lifelong learning, or is it maybe an encouragement that we really have an underutilized capacity? But anyways, we really are confronted by this notion that we must learn continuously. Right now at the college, we're reading a book by a guy named Jamie Marasotis that is really thinking about the future of education, and lifelong learning is fundamental to his understanding of this. Ahmed, do you want to think about this?
It's an important issue, and it's interesting because if you actually look back at the time of the Industrial Revolution, the same arguments were being made. Of course, there's an important issue that's happening now, that the rate of change is significantly higher than anything we've ever seen in the history of humanity. But if you look at the writings from the time of the Industrial Revolution, there were people saying, well, what are we going to do now that we have all these machines doing our work? And there were people in education who were arguing that we will have to adapt and we will have to learn new skills. Of course, the rate of adaptation, the rate of new skills was nowhere near what we're seeing right now, but it was there. There were skeptics who are saying, there is no way we will ever see a machine as strong as a human being. Obviously, this has proved we've long had machines that are stronger than any human beings. And I see the same arguments now. Are we going to see machines that are, yes, we will. We probably will see machines that act smarter than most human beings. But the human mind has an infinite capacity of change and of adaptation. And we've seen it time again in the history of humanity. And the optimist in me says we will see it again this time around. It's going to be faster. There will be, unfortunately, suffering throughout the process. It's inevitable that there will be human suffering, but the role of society as a whole is to figure out ways to minimize that and to increase the opportunities for people to learn and to adapt and so on.
Thank you. We should probably, before we're done, come back to the question of whether or not higher education right now is really tuned into lifelong learning in a way that's fitting to what these futurists are saying. But let's turn to a question now from a member of our farming community. As a farmer, I use my own data to drive future decisions that are made. Do you, Dana, feel greater adaptation of technologies and changes in farming practices will be driven by economics or regulatory policies set forth by the government?
That's a very good question. My background, of course, is in agricultural economics. So a lot of my decision-making personally is on the economics of things, and I see that very easily. There are some policy decisions that are being discussed with, Department of Transportation, with autonomous vehicles, and we have this discussion not just in agriculture, but in our larger society. I mean, Tesla's got autonomous vehicles on the highway today that, make adjustments for the human being in the driver's seat. And that is in part, something that will then continue and grow. So I think we have to have a very engaged public in our policymaking process. There are times like this where I believe that a slower policymaking process can help us make sure and be cautious and be aware of kind of the benefits as well, whether those are safety benefits or environmental benefits. Right now in agriculture, there's a lot of discussion around climate change and the variability in our weather patterns and the changes in our weather patterns. And so there could be policies that incentivize the adoption of agricultural technologies because of the benefits for our environment and for our climate, because of the kind of larger societal benefits. I don't see those sorts of policies being regulated in the near term. I do see them as more voluntary as we all kind of explore this realm of policy.
Great, thank you. So I think this is a question of the many faces of AI. Maybe for Ahmed, maybe Daryl has thought about this. How do you envision AI influencing fundraising and donor philanthropic giving patterns?
That's a really interesting question. There are a variety of different things, actually. There are too many aspects to this one. AI can actually help for fundraising efforts in terms of identifying who are the likely donors and so forth, more than, cultivating donors has always been a hard nut to crack for any fundraisers, and it's expensive and it's costly. If AI can help with this task, this can be a tremendous help there. But then also there is another aspect to this that's truly, I'm not sure what to make of it. Like any new technology, people like it or hate it. And this can by itself be an influence on who wants to donate and who does not. I mean, a college or an organization that's adopting AI will certainly attract certain donors and will certainly alienate other donors. Where do you draw the line? That's beyond my skill level, really. I mean, if I can make this conclusion, I probably would be extremely rich in forecasting, but I'm not. There are lots of other issues that my mind is racing now to think about, but if somebody else wants to take a crack at it.
Daryl, is anyone working on this in your world?
We are seeing AI applications in the world of philanthropy, just in terms of trying to identify donor interests, kind of engage with donors. I mean, we find that in general, people are really engaged by technology. And so it is easy to raise money in that area because either people are interested in promoting technology or they're worried about the societal impact of technology. And so there are a number of very wealthy individuals who are investing heavily in AI and other advanced technologies. Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, for example, are both space enthusiasts and have developed companies that are engaged in or are working to promote space tourism, space mining, and other applications like that. So I think there are lots of ways where technology and philanthropy are coming together.
Okay. I'd like to come back to an important point that you made in your remarks, Daryl, about the changing requirements of work, the jobs that will be lost, the new jobs that will be created, and the mismatch of skills that we might be experiencing. could you share with us some of the data about the vulnerability of certain sectors of the workforce? Is it fair to generalize that there's greater levels of vulnerability today than there would have been 50 years ago or 100 years ago with certain technological innovations, say combustion engines or something like that? Is it fair to say we're in a moment of vulnerability because of why? And then who's going to be the first frontline communities that are going to feel this? Are we all going to feel it across different kinds of educational levels or job levels, or is there going to be waves of this, different dimensions of it? How is this new situation going to be noticed?
I mean, the jobs I worry the most about are entry-level jobs, because there tends to be more of a routine element there. And AI and robotics are both really good at routine tasks. Now, as you take on higher level tasks that require more creativity, that becomes a much bigger challenge for AI, and the AI still isn't good enough to replace those types of jobs. But repetitive tasks are not limited to entry-level jobs. So I mentioned earlier the area of accounting. People are, even though that's a very professional occupation, it's basically dealing in numbers, managing money, kind of looking at financial transactions. It turns out AI is actually very good at that. There are a number of leading financial institutions that have really incorporated AI there. So people who work in accounting are among the types of people that, even though that's not exactly an entry-level job, their tasks can be automated. And so for young people, the advice that I like to give is, well, one, you need to learn data skills, because if you have data skills, you're going to be golden basically for the next 30 years, because we need more people with data and quantitative skills. But any job that is not routine, you are going to be less vulnerable to automation and having some types of ramifications for your jobs.
So talk to us about where policy is, where you think the direction is, say in Washington, D.C. right now in job recovery. We're in a mode where the last president and the current president wants to recover jobs that have gone overseas and rebuild the domestic work opportunity, the workplace. Do we have a plan for developing capacities, in K-12 education to prepare people for this new workforce realities? Are we pivoting in time to give folks the skill set and the capacity for this lifelong learning? Are we doing anything to meaningfully prepare them, or are we setting people up for a hard bump, or we're putting this in the laps of employees to do the reskilling and the upskilling?
I mean, right now, I think we are putting much more of the onus on employees to kind of figure out what skills they need and how to go about doing them. I personally think as a society, we need to be providing more help. I mean, we put a lot of money into K-12 education, but very little into adult education. I spoke at a panel of Midwestern governors a couple of years ago, and I was on a panel with a guy who was a CEO of a major online platform, and he predicted that over the next 10 years, the adult education market was going to be as big as the current higher education market, meaning the need for new skills is going to advance at such a rapid rate that online learning platforms are going to become widely used, certificate programs. There are a lot of companies that are taking on the mission of educating their own workers and trying to provide them with new skills. That's a great development. We certainly encourage that, and companies should be given tax credits to help retrain their workers, because that's a clear benefit for society as a whole. In my Future of Work book, I talk about perhaps creating something that I call a citizens learning account, kind of equivalent to an IRA, where you set aside money for your retirement on a tax advantaged basis, and then you retire and you're able to take advantage of that investment. We might need to think about something like that for worker retraining, that there could be an account set up that you would contribute to on a tax advantaged basis. Your employer might match that. And then as you need to develop new skills, there's this fund that you can draw on to pay for those things. So, the individual is very much in charge of that account, but it's a way to use the tax code to encourage and help them to gain new skills at various points during their lifetime.
I want to ask Ahmed about the experience of the classroom, but before we go there, Daryl, are there other countries that are way ahead of us on developing these kinds of training programs? There might be a public-private partnership that are ahead of us in preparing for that new workforce. Are we behind as a society compared to other societies that we compete with? Because competition in the global marketplace is a big part of this story.
I don't think the United States is necessarily behind in this area, because the sad reality is most countries are not doing what they need to be doing. Now, there are some other countries, and I'd say more in Europe, that are thinking about this, that this topic is very much on the national conversation. They're having national debates. How do we provide new skills? Who's going to pay for it? The United States, I think, is still in the very opening stages of that. And of course, we are a very polarized country between Republicans and Democrats. And so that impedes our ability to actually address problems of education, healthcare, and worker retraining. So that certainly is a problem. And then, the big competition is going to be China. China's investing heavily in AI. They're moving rapidly ahead in that area. They're spending a lot of money to educate their young people. So we do need to keep an eye on that as well.
Yeah. Ahmed, can you talk to us about what your students are taking away from these courses you're teaching them? I'm sure it's not lost on them that this future is going to change dramatically. Are they adopting the kind of mindset and aspiration to be these lifelong adaptive learners? Are you having to help them own that? I mean, the concern for that first paid job continues to be very real, and what a lot of college students focus on. So what are you hearing from students, and where are you taking them as an educator in this future that you understand?
It's actually interesting. The younger generation is way more willing than, say, our generation to embrace these ideas and these changes. Of course, most of the students I teach are computer science students, so to start with, that's the expectation. They know they are going into a field that's very rapidly changing, and they're readily embracing the idea of change. But when they're introduced to new concepts like AI, I find that they're hungry for this kind of knowledge. Whether it's, we have a course directly called Introduction to AI, where students who take this course, oftentimes they tell me this is really an eye-opening exercise. We didn't expect it to be this way, but they're embracing it. They really want more. It's probably one of the few courses that last time I taught it, several students came to me and told me, well, okay, this course is called Introduction to AI. Are you going to give us another course that's more in depth than that? We would really love to do that. But then also, I try to introduce these concepts in a variety of other contexts, because human knowledge is not exactly compartmentalized. It integrates well with other ideas. Just last week, in my management information systems class, which is primarily for business students, everybody there is some flavor or another of business. We were talking about AI, and it probably is one of the class sessions that generated more class discussion than any other session this semester. I'm still seeing the effects of it now. I have them discussing it online, and the discussion, you will not believe how heated the discussion is, and they're arguing with each other, supporting each other's ideas, contradicting each other's ideas, which is a very healthy thing to see. So the young generation is really embracing the idea of change. They've been conditioned to accept this as part of their future since they were much younger than this, before we even saw them in college. So that's a very ripe environment that we in higher education have a responsibility to cultivate in them and help them navigate this.
Good, thank you. Yeah, again, I've mentioned to our viewers that as a college, we're currently working through a book by Jeremy Marasotis called Human Work in an Age of Smart Machines. And he takes a position that I want to probe for a little bit before I go back to a question for Dana. But his suggestion is that, of course, automation is going to take up all those routine jobs. And the only way forward is to have a vision of universal higher education. It doesn't mean baccalaureate education, but it does mean, formal education for all Americans after K-12, something on that along that line. And he has a vision, what he calls human work of different kinds of activities, which he calls helpers, bridgers, integrators, and creators. And he has his mind on the kinds of jobs that he thinks are automation proof. And there's various books that are out on that subject. There's a well-read book called Robot Proof about higher education. From where you all sit and what the futures you want, do you think that somehow American society needs to pivot toward this aspiration for higher education for all? It has been a part of the vision of certain parts of higher ed going back 20 years. But I know it's not necessarily prevailing. It's not necessarily realistic. But are we gonna be okay without a kind of a turn in that direction? How do we as educators need to think about our future? We've got a very strong message here tonight about developing lifelong learning systems and thinking about that as part of what higher education is. But who will be the subject of that education? Will this be a universal expectation and requirement for us to have not only a culture, a society that competes globally, but really that provides people with the kind of work that we're searching to talk about in this series, which is engaging work, creative work, where people feel fulfilled, they solve problems, they make a contribution. So many of American workers don't feel like they participate at that level. They take a wage, but they look for satisfaction somewhere else. This person, Marasotis, really wants to argue for the importance of human work in our flourishing and in our development of certain capacities for democratic citizenship. So he really wants work to be a place that's holistically satisfying. So do we need as Americans to work towards this universal higher education?
I mean, for me, higher education was transformative. I actually grew up on a dairy farm in rural Ohio, and going to college kind of broadened my horizons, gave me different skills, and then opened up a lot of opportunities. So for me, it was certainly instrumental. I don't think everybody needs to go to college or a university. There are some people who can do very well for themselves through vocational education. We still are going to need people in the trades. But I think even those jobs are getting more computerized. Like when I take my car to my local repair place, they pull out all these computers to do the diagnosis because, the engines are no longer just spark plugs and carburetors. They are computerized systems that drive the vehicles. So even those jobs, there's an element of technology that's coming into them. So I think it's going to be hard for people to avoid some tech impact on their job. And so they're going to have to figure out ways to get the skills. For some, it will be colleges or universities. For some, it could be vocational education. For some people, it could be an online course that they take. It may be a certificate program that they take. So there are lots of different ways to do it. But I think the key thing is skill acquisition and providing a vehicle for people to get the skills that they need given their interests and the type of job that they have.
I'm going to pose a question to Dana, but Ahmed, do you want to talk about this?
I think Daryl put it really, really well. There isn't really much to add, but yes, I agree with everything that Daryl said here, that Yes, we do need continuing education, but there will always be opportunities for not everybody will need that. For some reason, I was thinking for the trades while there, I was saying that. I mean, we will always need the plumber and the carpenter, and they're not going anywhere at these jobs.
Okay. If you have some thoughts on this, Dana, we're happy to hear them. I have a different question for you at this point. Any thoughts on education for the future of farming and ranching?
I think this is a great question. I think it's a great question to really highlight a strength I believe that American agriculture has that a lot of other countries have been slower in adopting, and that has been in America. We have a research and education system with a lot of our land grant institutions that do research and education in agriculture, and that extension network really has provided lifelong learning opportunities for farmers to learn about new technologies, whether that's a seed technology or mechanical technology, those sorts of things that are being researched and brought into the industry. I do believe there is a growing sense of reimagining what extension looks like, what it looks like to learn more about what's being researched in agriculture, and then how that is then delivered to farmers. That's part of the vision for Grand Farm. Is every Tuesday we have an open to the public sort of demonstration opportunity on what these technologies look like on a farm. Invite all farmers and ranchers and students of all ages to come see for themselves and have discussions and to learn. I think, really energizing people to learn all their life really can provide innovation through some of the most innovative, brainstorming, problem-solving people in the world.
Okay. So here's my question. We spoke about how, modern technology really transformed the face of rural America. One of the events that I've seen online is called the Autonomous Nation Conference, where people are going to get together and talk about autonomous technology. And when I first learned about Grand Farm and I heard about the autonomous farm, I thought, oh, you're talking about farms with no people on them? Really? I mean, that's where my mind went. We care about the life of rural America. We understand how it's interdependent with farming and with the nature of farming. We want our rural communities to flourish. We're part of that part of America here. In 10, 15, 20 years, are we going to see more people, you think, living in North Dakota and Minnesota in the rural area because of technology? Or are we going to have, farms where there aren't any people because you can do that all on your computer at a distance because you have machines that are smart? What's the vision for urban or for community for the renewal of rural America here?
So that's a great question. And I think, bringing up Autonomous Nation, we will have that again at Grand Farm in September this year. Really looking forward to a project to really look at trucks that will allow for automating of getting sugar beets from one place to another in the process. So fully engaged in that, really looking at 10, 15, 20 years down the road is hard in such a time where we have gone through just transformative change in the last 12 months. Had you asked me that question a year ago, yes, I would have said trends are that would mean for fewer people in rural America. But we had COVID, and we had an opportunity for people of all jobs to really think about their home and where they live. And if they can do that with some level of connectivity, we did see people, neighbors of mine in Washington, D.C. moved out of Washington, D.C. because they could do their job with good internet connection in a place where their family was. And so I think in 10, 15, 20 years, there is an opportunity for a reawakening of rural America and rural communities with proper infrastructure that provides connectivity, and with, mobility that allows us to have relationships around the world. The webinars that we're hosting with Grand Farm and with emerging prairie entrepreneurs, they're engaging people from all over the world. And that is exciting, because once we get to a point where we can be a little more mobile, then there's relationships and opportunities to learn from more diverse and, different types of learning styles around the world. So I do believe that the future is bright and it's vast, and it is great opportunity for agriculture and for rural America to really thrive.
Thank you. Yep. We've come to the end of our time. I'm going to give each of you an opportunity now to share a parting thought from the perspective of our audience, where we're not experts, but we understand that we have responsibility as citizens. We need to engage this matter. We have a lot to learn. We have to learn for the rest of our lives, we're being told. What kind of recommendations or steps would you encourage people to make to carry this conversation forward into the future? We'll start in the order that we started tonight. So Daryl, would you have some thoughts for our audience?
Yeah, I'd like to add a quick note, a quick footnote to what Dana said, because I agree 100% with what she said about, one, the need to renew rural America, which in many cases has been left behind over the last few decades. I know, speaking as someone who grew up in rural America, I can see the difference between the world where I lived 30 and 40 years ago versus some of the issues that are there now. And two, I actually do share some of her optimism about the opportunity to renew rural America, because one of the things that we've learned over the last year is the value of remote work. And a lot of companies now that are based on the East Coast or the West Coast, they're having difficulty finding the workers because it's so expensive to live in any of those places. And because of COVID, they've learned that they can actually hire people from the Midwest, from Minnesota, from North Dakota, and other places, and the people are working remotely. And so as long as we have good rural broadband, I think those types of opportunities are going to increase in the future. But it's important that all rural areas have access to broadband, because that's going to be really important for the opportunity to work outside of your local town.
So how do I get engaged? Who do I listen to? What do I read?
I think there are a lot of people writing on these topics now. I mean, you mentioned the Aspen Institute has a Future of Work project. They are doing high quality work. There's a lot of work going on at universities across the country now. So I think there's a much more attention being devoted to technology innovation and the impact on the workforce now than was the case even a couple of years ago.
Okay, thank you. Ahmed, what do we need to help our students think about?
Well, it's for our students, I know there are many students in attendance today. One thing to note is, yes, we are all saying we need lifelong education and so forth, but this does not mean it's a one size fits all. Everybody has to learn these and only these skills. The technological skills that will be needed are going to be diverse. They're going to be varied. And I think for students, the important lesson is to do what we've always encouraged students to do: follow your passion. Follow the news, know what are the latest trends, but then pick and choose and find which ones to really pursue and which ones to know about it and keep it as a side note, because we will need a variety of different skills. And the only way to get these different skills is if each of us follows our passions and we complement each other.
Thank you. Dana, last word?
So, some of my encouragements to the audience and particularly to the students is stay diversified, stay agile in your learning, and don't think of your learning as something that's going to end when you leave college. Create opportunities in your career to learn and have that discussion with your employers about what's their responsibility, what's your responsibility. Really have that relationship of learning. And then for the adults that are, and the alumni that are watching tonight and in the future, one of my real passions is that we have everyday Americans engaged in our policymaking and government process, that Americans know their representatives, they have relationships with them, they communicate with them, that there's an awareness of the regulations and policies like rural broadband infrastructure developments and the investments that our government is making in those, that those conversations are active, respectful, that there's good dialogue there. And, in this season, I do think America needs good, respectful dialogue about our policies. And so hopeful that we can engage that part. And then, just an open invitation to come see some autonomous activity on the Grand Farm. Realize that it does take human beings at this stage in development to operate those vehicles and those pieces of machinery, but want to make sure that everybody knows they're invited to come see it for themselves.
Thank you, Ahmed Kamel, Dana Peterson, Daryl West, for your insightful reflections this evening. You've helped us to better understand new automation, both its promise and its challenges. You've broadened our moral worlds. We thank you so much for your generosity of time and especially for modeling responsible citizenship. Thank you to Carol Hedberg, Anna Benson, Brent Johnson, Todd Walworth, Wade Iverson, Chris Mason, and Greg Trevine for their help this evening with this program. Thanks to our audience for joining us tonight and for your good questions. Please join us again in April for a concluding conversation with theologian Miroslav Wolf about work and a life worth living. Good night from the Lorentzsen Center for Faith and Work at Concordia College. Stay safe and good work to you.